History often remembers wars through speeches, surrender documents, and famous photographs. But sometimes, the moment that reshapes the world happens in silence, inside a cockpit, among exhausted men who barely understand what they are carrying. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the Second World War did not end with a declaration. It changed direction with a countdown spoken calmly over the Pacific, by a man trained to think only in altitude, airspeed, and timing. What followed was not heroism, nor drama as history books portray it, but something far colder, more unsettling. This is the story of the mission that forced an empire to face a reality it had refused to accept, and of the ordinary human behavior that accompanied the most extraordinary act of destruction ever unleashed. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, flying at 31,600 feet above Hiroshima, Colonel Paul Tibbets began counting down the final seconds. Below him lay a living city. Beneath the aircraft rested a weapon capable of erasing 4 square miles in a blink of time. Yet what Tibbets said and what most of his crew did, in those final moments was not what history imagines. There was no speech. No dramatic pause. The truth was far more unsettling. Most of the 12 men aboard had slept through much of the 6-hour flight to Japan. They were exhausted. Unaware or unwilling to fully grasp that they carried humanity's first atomic weapon. What happened after that bomb was released would force Japan's military leadership to confront a truth they had avoided for 3 long years. The mission began long before sunrise at 2:45 a.m., under total darkness. On Tinian Island, ground crews worked under shielded flashlights as 12 men climbed into a specially modified B-29 superfortress. Tibbets had named the aircraft Enola Gay, after his mother. Bombardier Thomas Farabee settled into position. Navigator Theodore Dutch Van Kirk unfolded his charts. Tail gunner George Caron secured the rear. Radar officer Jacob Baser checked his instruments. What none of them truly understood was the weight carried beneath their feet. Tibbets did understand. He had carried the secret for months, knowledge that separated him from every other man aboard. They were about to execute the single most destructive act in human history. The Enola Gay lifted off smoothly, climbing into the darkness over the Pacific. 4 hours, the flight passed with eerie normality. Baser fell asleep shortly after takeoff. Others drifted in and out of rest. Somewhere in the forward compartment, boredom took over. Crewmen rolled oranges down the narrow tunnel, laughing as they tried to bounce them off a sleeping head. It was absurd. And deeply human. At some point, Tibbets finally told them the truth. They were carrying an atomic bomb, one with the explosive power of 20,000 tons of TNT. It would likely destroy an entire city. The reaction was muted. No panic. No outrage. A few technical questions. Then silence. Several men simply tried to sleep again. It revealed something uncomfortable about human nature. Faced with the unthinkable, people often don't process it at all. As dawn approached, the mood shifted. Van Kirk confirmed their position. Weather reconnaissance aircraft reported clear skies over Hiroshima. The primary target was approved. Tibbets began the final approach. Radio silence was strict protocol, but coordination was required with accompanying aircraft collecting scientific data. Tibbets made a decision that violated orders. He would break silence with a countdown. At 8:14 a.m., Farabee spoke calmly, "I have the aiming point in sight." Van Kirk confirmed the coordinates. Dark protective goggles were pulled down. Hiroshima, far below, continued its mourning, 350,000 people unaware. 30 seconds. Every man braced. They knew the escape maneuver by heart. A violent 155-degree turn, full power climb, maximum distance before detonation. 20 seconds. Tibbets' hands were steady. Years of combat had trained him to focus on numbers, not consequences. Airspeed. Altitude. Timing. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, Japan time, the Enola Gay released Little Boy. The aircraft leapt upward as Tibbets threw it into the escape turn. Full power. Climbing hard. Then silence. 43 seconds. The bomb fell through 6 miles of air. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. Tibbets removed his goggles, they darkened the instruments too much. He needed to see. Then Caron's voice crackled over the intercom. "Here it comes." The sensation arrived before the sight. A metallic taste flooded Tibbets' mouth. Electrolysis. The cockpit filled with blinding light, despite flying away. Then the shockwave hit. 2.5 gs. The aircraft shook violently. A second wave followed. Then a third. When Tibbets turned back, the sight froze the crew in silence. A towering mushroom cloud rose where Hiroshima had been, already climbing past 50,000 feet. It pulsed with impossible colors, purples, oranges, glowing from within. The whole sky lit up, Tibbets would later recall. Where a city had stood, there was only a boiling black mass. 600 yards above Hiroshima, in 1 millisecond, energy equal to 20,000 tons of TNT was released. Temperatures reached 300,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At ground zero, human beings ceased to exist instantly. Shadows burned into stone. Fire spread across 4 square miles. Buildings collapsed like paper. 90 feet beneath Tokyo, in a reinforced war room, Japanese military leadership received a broken transmission. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Unknown weapon. Casualties catastrophic. The message ended mid-sentence. Lieutenant Colonel Yoshida Yamamoto burst through the steel door, forgetting protocol, forgetting the bow. General Yashijiro Yumizu read the report and immediately assumed the impossible. A massive conventional raid. Hundreds of bombers. But reconnaissance reports contradicted it. Only 3 B-29s had been tracked over Hiroshima. 3 aircraft. Not 300. Admiral Somu Toyota stared at the wall map. His intelligence officers knew bomber capabilities. Nothing explained this. By 10 a.m., pilots reported a mushroom cloud rising above 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. By 11:30, ground reports spoke of a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. At 2 p.m., the Supreme War Council gathered in silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki laid the reports on the table. His hands trembled. In that room, Japan's leaders began to understand what the Enola Gay had revealed. Every assumption guiding the war since Pearl Harbor was wrong. The conflict they believed they were fighting had never truly existed. And it had all begun hours earlier on a quiet runway with tired men rolling oranges through a metal tube, because facing the incomprehensible was harder than pretending it wasn't there. As first light spread across the Pacific, the mood inside the aircraft changed. The joke stopped. The oranges were forgotten. One by one, the men turned inward, checking equipment with renewed attention. This was no longer just another long flight. Navigator Dutch Van Kirk confirmed their approach to the Japanese mainland. Weather reconnaissance aircraft transmitted their findings. Clear skies. No cloud cover. Hiroshima approved as the primary target. 350,000 people waited below, unaware. Colonel Paul Tibbets' voice came over the intercom, calm and precise, exactly as it had been on every mission before. They were 30 minutes from the target. It was time to prepare. At 8 a.m. Japan time, the final weather report arrived. Clear skies over Hiroshima. Visibility unlimited. Primary target confirmed. Perfect weather for destruction. Tibbets acknowledged the transmission and adjusted course. Van Kirk confirmed the approach vector. Bombardier Thomas Farabee began his final calculations. The Enola Gay was 25 minutes from the aiming point. The mission plan was explicit. Total radio silence. Command wanted no chance of Japanese detection. But Tibbets faced a problem that theory had not solved. 2 other B-29s were flying with them, one carrying scientific instruments, the other assigned to photography. Both needed to know the precise moment of release to execute their escape maneuvers. Tibbets made the call. He would break radio silence. The violation would be noted later. But without coordination, the accompanying aircraft could be caught in the shockwave. The risk was unacceptable. At 8:14 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. Cold air rushed through the aircraft at 31,600 feet. Below, Hiroshima continued its morning routine. Shops opened. Children walked to school. Factory shifts began. 3 B-29s overhead meant reconnaissance. Nothing more. Inside the cockpit, Farabee leaned into the Norden bomb site. His eye followed the crosshairs. His hand made almost invisible corrections. I have the aiming point in sight. Van Kirk verified the position against his charts. Altitude confirmed. Airspeed confirmed. Heading confirmed. The crew pulled down their protective goggles, thick, dark welding glass meant to shield their eyes from a light brighter than anything they had ever imagined. Tibbets began the countdown. His voice was steady, professional, indistinguishable from the hundreds of training runs that had come before. 1 minute out. Farabee adjusted slightly for wind drift. Far below, the T-shaped AIY bridge sharpened into view, the chosen aiming point, selected for its unmistakable outline. 30 seconds. Every man aboard braced. They knew the procedure. Immediately after release, Tibbets would throw the aircraft into a violent 155-degree diving turn. Full throttle. Maximum climb. Distance was survival. The scientists had calculated it precisely. Execute perfectly and they would live. Execute imperfectly, and the aircraft would be torn apart. 20 seconds. Tibbets' hands rested lightly on the controls. His eyes scanned the panel. Airspeed. Altitude. Heading. Everything was optimal. He was not thinking about the city below. He was thinking about angles, timing, throttle response, the choreography of survival drilled into him by years of combat flying. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, Japan time, pneumatic clamps released little boy. The Enola Gay lurched upward, suddenly 9,700 pounds lighter. Tibbets slammed the bomber into its escape maneuver, a brutal 155-degree turn that crushed every man into his seat. Engines roared at full power. The aircraft climbed, banked, fled from what it had just released. Then came silence. 43 seconds. The bomb fell through 6 miles of air. No flash. No explosion. Only the thunder of engines and the quiet certainty that history had already shifted, even if the world had not yet realized it. Years later, Tibbets would fixate on those 17 seconds. The plan called for release at exactly 8:15 a.m. They were late. After a 6-hour flight covering nearly 1,500 miles, navigating by stars and dead reckoning without GPS, they missed the mark by 17 seconds. We weren't perfect, he said. The number haunted him. Not because it mattered operationally, the bomb functioned exactly as designed, but because it symbolized the gap between human precision and mathematical perfection. History's most exact mistake. The escape maneuver continued. The Enola Gay banked harder than any B-29 was ever meant to. Full throttle. Every engine screaming. Gravity pulled sideways as men felt themselves pressed unnaturally into their seats. Tibbets removed his goggles. The dark glass made the instruments unreadable, and he needed absolute clarity. The scientist had calculated the escape path to the degree. Any deviation meant death. He trusted numbers he could not verify. 43 seconds. That was how long little boy would fall before detonation. 43 seconds to outrun it. The first sensation was not visual. Tibbets tasted metal, sharp chemical. Electrolysis. Ionized air from radiation reaching the aircraft despite the distance. Then light flooded the cockpit. Not sunrise. Not a flash. Instant, total illumination, light without direction, without source. From the tail gunner's position, George Caron was the only man looking back. Here it comes, his voice crackled. The first shockwave struck like a hammer. 2.5 GS. The aircraft shook so violently Tibbets thought they had been hit by flak. Metal groaned. Rivets strained. Then the second wave hit. 2 GS, less powerful but still brutal. A third followed. At 8:16 a.m., 600 yards above Hiroshima, little boy detonated. In 1 millisecond, energy equal to 20,000 tons of TNT was unleashed. Temperatures at the core reached millions of degrees. A fireball expanded at impossible speed, generating heat of 300,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At ground zero, human beings did not burn. They vanished. Their shadows burned into concrete, marking where they had stood an instant earlier. The thermal pulse ignited everything flammable across 4 square miles. The pressure wave flattened buildings like cardboard. When Tibbets completed the turn and looked back, he saw something no human had ever seen before. A mushroom cloud rose from where Hiroshima had been, already climbing past 40,000 feet, still growing, boiling upward with terrifying speed. The colors were unreal. Purples and oranges pulsed with internal light, hues that seemed to belong to another world. The whole sky lit up, Tibbets later said. But the sky had not simply lit up. It had transformed. Where a city of 350,000 people had existed moments earlier, nothing recognizable remained. No streets. No buildings. No landmarks. Only a black, churning mass. From their altitude, it looked as if Hiroshima had never existed at all. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. They had studied photographs of the Trinity test. They knew the numbers. But witnessing the annihilation of a living city was something entirely different. The instruments showed steady climb. Engines normal. Systems intact. Everything functioned exactly as designed. And yet every man aboard understood they had crossed a threshold. They had introduced a form of violence that made all previous warfare obsolete. Tibbets held course. Van Kirk plotted the return to Tinian. The mission continued. But the silence inside the cockpit told a different story, a recognition no training could prepare them for. They had just witnessed the end of one world and the beginning of another. Tibbets circled the city while crew members documented the rising cloud. Camera shutters clicked in steady rhythm. Frame after frame was captured with clinical distance. These images would later be studied by scientists, analyzed by strategists, and eventually published across the world. In that moment, they were simply data, numbers and shapes recorded without commentary. The flight back to Tinian took another 6 hours. 12 hours total in the air. No one celebrated. No one tried to explain what they had seen. The men returned to routine. Some stared out at the empty Pacific. Others tried to sleep. A few sat silently at their stations, performing checks they had completed hundreds of times before. Tibbets remained unchanged. He monitored fuel consumption. He confirmed headings. He made minor course corrections. The Enola Gay flew as it always had, steady, predictable, obedient to physics and engineering. Nothing about the aircraft suggested it had just delivered the most consequential strike in human history. At 2:58 p.m. Tinian time, the bomber touched down at North Field. The wheels met the runway with the same muted thump as countless landings before. Throttles were reduced. Engines wound down. Ground crews waited, men who knew something extraordinary had occurred, but not yet what it meant. The 12 crew members exited through the forward hatch. Fatigue showed clearly on their faces. 12 hours at altitude. Physical strain. Mental weight they had not yet fully named. They stood on the tarmac in the humid afternoon heat, blinking under the tropical sun. General Karl Spatz waited nearby with senior officers. The Distinguished Flying Cross would be awarded to Tibbets immediately, an unprecedented honor for a single mission. But first the crew needed clarity. Tibbets gathered them together. His voice carried the same calm matter-of-fact tone he had used over Hiroshima. "Fellows," he said, "you have just dropped the first atomic bomb in history." The words hung in the heavy air. Several men stared at him as if he had spoken in another language. Bombardier Tom Farabee would later say that was the first time he had ever heard the term atomic bomb. Moments later, a brigadier general approached him and added bluntly, "The president has announced it." Understanding arrived slowly. They had known the weapon was powerful. They had seen the cloud. They had felt the shockwaves from miles away. But the historical weight, the realization that they had crossed a permanent boundary, came in stages. Some crew members nodded quietly. Others asked technical questions about yield and altitude. The reactions were subdued, professional. This was not fresh horror, it was delayed recognition. Tibbets remained focused on execution. Fuel usage had matched projections. The escape maneuver had worked. Detonation altitude was correct. From a technical perspective, the mission had been flawless. Moral reckoning would come later. For now, there was exhaustion, heat, and the unspoken knowledge that something irreversible had been done. 16 hours after the bombing, President Harry Truman addressed the world. His statement introduced a new language to humanity: atomic bomb, nuclear fission, 20,000 tons of TNT. These were not theoretical ideas. They described a city that no longer existed. Reactions followed predictable lines. Allied nations celebrated a weapon that promised to end the war. Neutral states expressed alarm. Japan's leadership said nothing. Within days, photographs of the mushroom cloud appeared in newspapers around the globe. The image became iconic before most people understood what it represented. Paul Tibbets became the most famous pilot on Earth, and he never apologized. In the years that followed, he spoke about the mission in technical terms. Altitude, airspeed, yield. He explained mechanics with engineering precision. The human toll, estimates ranging from 90,000 to over 160,000 deaths, rarely entered his explanations. This was not indifference. It was calculation. Tibbets understood the numbers behind the alternative. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, carried projections of catastrophic scale: 500,000 to 1 million American casualties. 5 to 10 million Japanese dead. To him the equation was clear. Hiroshima versus invasion. Tens of thousands versus millions. The bomb, in his view, saved lives, American and Japanese alike. As decades passed, Tibbets became increasingly controversial. Peace activists demanded remorse. Veterans organizations hailed him as a hero. Religious leaders condemned weapons that erased civilians without distinction. He rejected all of it. In 1975 he stated his position plainly: "I'm proud that I was able to start with nothing, plan it, and have it work as perfectly as it did. I sleep peacefully every night." The remark shocked many. Critics assumed such destruction would crush any conscience. They were wrong. Tibbets believed the war would not have ended soon without the bomb. The invasion, he argued, would have been catastrophic. My only goal, he said repeatedly, was to end the killing as quickly as possible. Interview after interview yielded the same answer. No regret. No ambiguity. No apology. He had been given orders. He had executed them precisely. The outcome, to him, justified the action. Paul Tibbets died on November 1, 2007, at the age of 92. His final request reflected his understanding of the symbol he had become. No funeral. No headstone. No grave marker. He feared his burial site would become a political target. He was cremated. His ashes were scattered. His resting place left unknown. What Paul Tibbets said when he released the atomic bomb was not philosophy. It was not confession. It was a countdown. 1 minute out. 30 seconds. 20. 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4. Later, only one sentence to his crew. Fellows, you've just dropped the first atomic bomb in history. The horror was not in the words. It was in the consequences. 4 square miles erased. A city turned to shadow. A war ended. An age of nuclear fear begun. The atomic era did not begin with moral debate. It began with a release, a retreat, and a pilot who never looked back.